Our Faith Journey, a look at the history of St. Mary Parish as we celebrate our 100th anniversary. History tells us that the first Mass was celebrated in Shrewsbury during the summer of 1868. It took place at the Mulvey home at 76 South Street and was said by Father Patrick Thomas O'Reilly. In 1869, the Reverend A.J. Derbuel was assigned to the first resident pastorate of St. Luke's in West Boylston. He was also charged with attending the religious needs of the Shrewsbury people. It is said that a stagecoach ran between West Boylston and Shrewsbury at that time, and the Reverend Derbuel rode the stage on the muddy back roads every few weeks to celebrate Mass for our community in the Fountain Engine House. It was also in the engine house that the first Sunday school was held. In 1870, when there were about 60 members in the parish, a momentous decision was made. A fund was started to raise money to build a modest edifice to serve as a church of our own in Shrewsbury. On January 16, 1872, Bishop O'Reilly acquired a deed to a tract of land measuring 3/8 of an acre, located at 622 Main Street, and St. Teresa's Church was built at a cost of $4,000. Parishioners not only donated what money they could, but also their labor in constructing the little 30 by 40-foot building. St. Teresa's Church remained a mission with no resident pastor. Therefore, for a decade or two, priests from Old St. Anne's in Worcester would come to celebrate Mass for our community. On September 10, 1922, Reverend Thomas McCone became the first resident pastor of St. Teresa's, which was elevated on the very same date to parochial status. Father McCone lived for a short time in an apartment on South Street until the former rectory at 18 Summer Street was purchased from Henry Stone. Permission was granted by the bishop for a twin church project to start. Father McCone led it along with his curate, Father Henry Scanlon. Land was purchased from Henry Stone on the west side of Summer Street near the parish rectory, and in the spring of 1923, work was begun on the original St. Mary's Church. On August 17, 1924, an unusual event in Catholic Church history took place when the two new twin churches were dedicated by Bishop Thomas M. O'Leary. St. Mary's dedication took place at 11 a.m. with a high mass celebrated by Father Selig, a former pastor. St. Anne's Church was dedicated in the afternoon with a solemn benediction at 3 o'clock. Architecture of both churches was of Gothic type and similar design. St. Mary's Church was planned to accommodate 414 people, and St. Anne's was slightly larger and would hold 512. Years went by, and the church continued to expand and grow in Shrewsbury. Much was accomplished in many areas. Little St. Teresa's was remodeled and used for a parish hall, and the ladies of the church organized the Catholic Women's League in 1933. They toiled on many projects: sewing circles, food sales, lawn parties, and the Christmas fair, and the always, every year, festive silver tea. With the conflict of World War II, many of our boys went off to serve their country. All the churches contributed to the war effort. St. Mary's pastor, Father Warburton, and his staff sent out a monthly newsletter to the boys and girls in service from home. On March 29, 1950, Father Edward Lynch came to St. Mary's as the fourth pastor of our church. The renovation and redecoration of St. Mary's was one of Father Lynch's first chores. The church exterior was painted, the interior cleaned and repainted, the sacristies remodeled, A new vestment and linen cabinet were installed, among other improvements. The parish continued to grow, and questions arose about possible expansion of the church, dividing the parish, or constructing a new and larger church. A house at the rear of the rectory became available and was purchased in 1954. Another house at 644 Main Street became available in about 1956. The parish also purchased it, but eventually tore it down. This left an open space at the corner of Summer and Main Streets. Plans were drawn up, and construction of our existing church and school commenced on September 24th, 1959. January 29th, 1961, the Most Reverend Bernard Flanagan officiated at the laying of the cornerstone and the consecration of the bells. The bells were donated and came from Woburn, Massachusetts, and Ascension School in Worcester. They are known as St. Mary's bells and St. Bernard's bell. When installed, they were 87 and 101 years old, respectively. Reverend Lynch consecrated the altar on May 13, 1961. The large altar of roughly hewn Italian marble weighs over 5 tons. It is supported by 3 blocks of similar materials. A huge canopy hung suspended above the altar by iron chains. The windows in the church were imported from Florence, Italy. "This is the church our parishioners wanted to have," said Father Lynch. The $600,000 building, designed with its main focus on public worship rather than private devotions, didn't have any statues and was very simply decorated. Bishop Flanagan officiated at the solemn blessing of the church and celebrated the first public Mass on May 15, 1961. St. Mary's School opened in September of 1961, and a convent for the Sisters of Notre Dame who staffed it was built on the property in 1962. When the Sisters of Notre Dame moved out 30 years later, the convent became what is known today as our pastoral center. On November 17, 1964, about 500 people attended an English-sung high mass at St. Mary's, incorporating more change from traditional Roman Catholic practice than any other ever held in this area. Father Lynch celebrated the Mass on a portable altar facing the congregation. Father Lynch was also the president of the New England Regional Conference of the National Liturgical Conference, which prepared the revised liturgy for the United States. When St. Mary's was built in 1964, the architect designed the gallery at the west end of the narthex with large chambers for installation of a pipe organ. But due to conditions then, an electronic instrument was installed instead. It was not until the mid-80s that serious consideration was given to install an instrument. In May of 1987, installation began by the Berkshire Organ Company. The project unfortunately stopped in June of 1989 when the president of the organ company passed away and the company ceased to exist. Because of the false start with the original company, the cost of completing the organ was considerably more than the parish had anticipated. The decision was made to use a lesser quality electronic control system in order to save money, with the hope that a higher quality console would replace it in the future. In 2018, and because of generous donations of over $30,000, the church was able to upgrade the organ as it is today. In 1992, girls were allowed to be altar servers, and in 1994 and 1995, the parish studied the possibility of making liturgically correct church renovations and concluded they were too costly and would not serve future needs. But in the next 2 years, the pews were refurbished, the crucifix behind the main altar was replaced by a mosaic of the risen Christ, and a new baptismal font and ambo were installed. Father Paul O'Connell was pastor then, and during his tenure, many new activities and ministries were developed, and the parish celebrated its 75th anniversary. The parish center was named for Father O'Connell when he ended his 13 years as pastor here. In 2009, the parish community led by Monsignor Michael Rose added an extension to the parish and school buildings, which includes our large meeting room and the gathering space, which both provide additional room for our community gatherings as well as prayerful spaces. An elevator and air conditioning and a more convenient entrance to the school were also included. Like the rest of the world in 2020, our parish had to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure the safety of our community. There was no in-person masses. Instead, they were live streamed or recorded to an empty church, and parishioners listened and participated from their homes. Once in-person Mass attendance resumed, measures were taken to minimize the risk of contamination and spreading the virus. We taped off every other pew and placed tape markers in the aisle to ensure 6 feet social distancing could be followed. Despite these inconveniences, parishioners were delighted to be back together for worship after many months of isolation. The summer of 2022 was busy at St. Mary's, with the first phase of our church renovation project underway. This required closing the church, and weekend and daily masses were held in the parish hall. With the first phase, new ceramic tile was installed throughout the church, new kneel pads were placed on refinished pews, sanctuary furniture was refinished, and new lighting was installed. On Sunday, September 11th, at the 11 a.m. Mass, we celebrated our 100th anniversary and kicked off our Centennial celebrations. The work in the second phase began in the summer of 2023 and included refinishing oak doors and the outdoor canopy at the front entrance. Additional woodwork was installed in the sanctuary, and the reconciliation room was updated. On September 10th, 2023, St. Mary's Parish celebrated the mark of the closing of our centennial year and blessed our new baptismal font, the centerpiece of our church renovation work this past year. So many names unnamed, so many dates unrecorded. The roster of parish life is studded with women and men, boys and girls who have been its bone and muscle. From its small beginning to its present size, St. Mary's strength is its people. Here is where life is. The parish is holding hands at moments of heartbreak, joy, and jubilations. It is weddings and funerals. It is baptisms and confirmations, and children opening their lips and hearts at their first communion. It is quiet meetings and noisy celebrations and events. St. Mary's Parish is home.